Hello guys, this time we'll be looking at the idea of the hanging pieces. As I just mentioned in recent videos, we have the hanging pieces aka LPDO, loose pieces drop off. They are the pieces that are not protected and therefore they are vulnerable to tactics. They are the targets or tactical targets to start with if you are just looking at the position from tactical standpoint. And then when we recognize if the pieces are hanging or if the pieces are not protected, it's easy to apply to the practical application of the tactical model. And at the same time, it's faster and more efficient to see how and why I can exploit the tactical weaknesses of the position. Therefore, in this video, we'll have a look at LPDO, or if you wish, the hanging pieces. I'll show you how to recognize if the piece is hanging, and at the same time we'll have a look at the bunch of the examples to present the hanging pieces idea. Let's get started. And now at this part we'll have a look at the positions that I'll just show you how to recognize if the piece is hanging. Take notice, these are the absolute basic positions, and if you know them you can skip them, get to the practical positions that I'll be talking about part 2. But now let's get from the absolute beginning, from the scratch. Now, if we have a look at the position, now we can see that the rook is standing on the c6 square. And now how to recognize if it is hanging. Now there are few options to see if the rook is hanging. First of all, if the rook is attacked by the pieces, the linear pieces, the space between the pieces must be unoccupied by either the pieces, either pawns. What does it mean? For example, the rook can be attacked by the pieces from the horizontal or vertical lines or by the pieces from the diagonals. Of course, horizontal and vertical lines are the qualities of the rooks and queens, and diagonal queens and bishops. Therefore, these are the linear attacks. If we'd like to see if the rook is hanging from the standpoint of the knight, then we need to see from the knight's distance. From the knight's distance, you can see the knight's circle. If the knight is standing in any of these squares, then the rook will be attacked. And the last part is to check out if the rook can be captured by the pawn, or pawns if you wish. Therefore, as you can see, the few short summary ideas. First, have a look at the open spaces on the vertical horizontal, then the open diagonals from both of the directions, and then it means that linear pieces may attack the rook. The second is to check out if the pawn is diagonally one square away, then the pawn can capture, and the last one is the knight's distance from the rook, because the knight is not a linear piece and it captures in a unique way. And therefore, if we understand this stuff, let's get into the simple examples. The first one, the bishop is in the proximity of the rook in the diagonal, therefore it can be captured. Therefore, at this moment, the rook is hanging. What about the position right here? The queen is on the open space. There are no pieces nor pawns on the diagonal, and the distance between the rook and the queen is not occupied. At the same time, the queen can capture diagonally, therefore the rook is hanging. The next one, the distance between the rook and the other rook is unoccupied, therefore the rook is hanging. Another one, the distance between the rooks are unoccupied and the rook is hanging. And the next one is when the pawns are attacking the rook. Take notice, if you are talking about the pawns, the pawn must have the contact, direct contact with the rook, therefore it's a little bit different idea. Probably the pawns are the easiest to recognize if they can capture the pieces. Therefore, at this moment, either of the pawn can capture the rook. And the last part, now the knights. The knights, as you probably may know, are tricky. What does it mean? It means they can capture the rook, but only, or capture any other pieces actually. In this case, we are just analyzing the rook. They can capture with specific ideas in mind. What are the ideas? First of all, if we are talking about captures, I'm talking about captures in one move. If the rook is standing on the light square, it never can be captured in one move by the knights if the knights are standing on the light square as well. Therefore, the first and most important rule. If you have the piece that you think or would like to check out if it is hanging, and if you check out or if you are checking out if it is hanging that the knight can capture, always check out at the squares that are the opposite color by the rook. For example, the dark squares. The dark square that are the closest. And now in a moment we'll see that the rook will be hanging or not. And now, what are the ideas? Take notice at this moment all of the knights can capture the rook because the rook is pretty much far away from the edge of the board or from the corner. Therefore, at this moment, I just give you a little bit of hint. We are drawing some kind of 3x3 squares, probably the easiest. And now, if you get into the diagonal, then the knights are right here. Therefore, at this moment, if you draw the lines, for example, right here, the horizontal and vertical, then these are the squares that you need to check out. Therefore, the first idea, if you would like to check out if the rook can be captured by the knight. And the second idea, you can draw the diagonal, again, two squares, this time not from the horizontal or vertical, but this time from the diagonal. Therefore, at this moment, from the diagonal, but if you make the diagonal, then you are just going the perpendicular lines for the lines that you are drawing. Therefore, it's either way you would like to check it out. The most important is to see it very efficiently. And now, one of the simple examples. Now we have the rook standing on the a6 square, and now can you quickly recognize if the rook is attacked by the knights, and either if the rook is attacked by the knights, and how many of the knights can capture the rook. First of all, a little bit of trolling, but take notice, your opponent will be trolling you too. If the rook is the dark one, if the rook is the black one, you cannot capture it by black knights. Therefore, it was a little bit of trolling. Why? Because the opponent will be trolling you too in a more tricky ways. The second of all, as we just mentioned, if the rook is standing on the light squares, only the knights that are standing on the dark squares are potentially the attackers. Therefore, if the knight is standing on the light squares, they cannot capture in one move. Potentially, they can be these knights. And now, as you can see, these knights can capture because they are in the proximity of the rook to be captured. Therefore, at this moment, the knights can capture the rook on the side of the board. Therefore, if the rook is on the dark squares, only analyzing the knights that are on the opposite color, the white knights, so to speak, and if the rook is standing on the light square, only analyze the knights that are standing on the dark squares. Therefore, at this moment, it's a way more efficient and you will not make simple mistakes. I guess it was helpful. And now the second part. This time we'll be looking at the hanging pieces in practical positions. Now let's have a look. Now, if white to move, what are the hanging pieces? Take notice, by pieces I'll be talking only about the pieces like rooks, knights, queens, bishops, not the pawns, but at some points I'll be showing you the points as well. The pawns that will be captured if they are not protected. But at this point, mostly we are looking at the pieces. First of all, what are the LPDO at black's camp? LPDO means the pieces that are not directly protected by any other pieces. The rook is not protected by any other pieces. The queen and the rook in the other corner are not protected by anything. Take notice, the knight is protected directly by the rook, the bishops are protected by the rook or the queen, and at the same time, the knight is not protected. And now, as you can see, at this moment, our pieces cannot capture any other pieces because they are, first of all, very far away, and second of all, there is no safe safe area to capture with, and therefore, at this moment, only one piece that can be captured is the knight e4. Therefore, hanging piece, LPDO, was the knight in the center. Another one, this time a way more open spaces, therefore, again, LPDO, the pieces that are not protected, the rook, and the other one, the rook in the corner, the other one is the knight on the side of the board. And now, at this moment, the knight can be captured? Yes, the bishop and the knight has the open space between these two, not occupied, and therefore at this moment bishop captures the knight, wins for free, at the same time delivering checkmate. Take notice, Sometimes the LPDO captures may result in a specific goals that I'll be talking about in the next episodes. Now another one. This time the position a little bit more crowded, so to speak. And again, first of all, let's have a look from the black's perspective, which pieces are not protected by any other pieces. There are only two pieces, the rook in the corner and the queen. And now, as we can see, if we are trying to have a look if the piece is possible to be captured by the pawns, then it's probably the easiest and the fastest visual aspect as well to have the diagonal drawn one square away left and right, and as we can see, the pawn can capture the queen immediately, the pawn from a3 to b4. Therefore, we just gained the queen. Another position, again, LPDO, the pieces that are not protected, or you can call it the hanging pieces if you wish. The rook in the corner, and the knight right here that is not protected as well. And now at this moment, do we have the diagonal lines or the horizontal lines? Yes, we have. Unoccupied space in between, therefore queen captures the knight, winning the knight and at the same time throwing the check. And now the next example. At this moment, let's have a look which are the pieces that are hanging, that are not protected. The rook in the corner and the queen right here. They are these pieces that are not protected. And now, can we capture these pieces? The rook cannot be captured by any other piece, but the knight can capture the queen, at the same time making a discovered check. Therefore, at this moment, discovered check is from the bishop attacking the king. At the same time, the knight step back, capture the queen. And now, again, what are the pieces that are not protected at all? These are the pieces, the following ones. The rook in the corner, and there is another one, the bishop right here. All of the other pieces are protected at least once by any other pieces. And now we can see the pawn cannot capture the bishop, the pawn cannot capture the rook. Now let's have a look if there are linear pieces that can attack the bishop. At least at this moment we cannot see any other pieces that can capture the bishop g7, the black bishop, but we can see the other direction that the rook is attacked by the bishop because the squares between are unoccupied. Therefore, at this moment, bishop captures the rook, and now it was the hanging piece. Another one, from the black's perspective. Bishop, rook, and another rook are hanging, not protected by any other pieces. Do we have the contact with the rook? Yes, we have. Therefore, we just capture, throwing the check at the same time, and the piece that captured the piece of the opponent cannot be recaptured, because then it would be the traits, not just the LPDO, the basic idea. Another one, at this moment, what are the pieces that are hanging from black's perspective? Black, bishop on b4, rook in the corner, the other rook in the other corner, and the queen. 4 pieces are hanging. Take notice, only one piece can be captured. This piece is the queen. We can capture the queen. Take notice, bishop cannot recapture because of the pawn. Rook is safe, therefore it was the LPDO. Loose pieces drop off, the piece of this type, or you can say hanging piece. Another one. At this moment, a little bit more pieces on the board. And now, again, the rook not protected. The queen not protected. All of the other pieces are protected. And now, as we can see, the rook cannot be captured because the pieces are not possible to capture the rook in one way. They are too far away. The knight's distance are not possible because the knights are not here. The pawn is not right there. And there are no access for the rook in the corner from the 3 directions. Horizontal, vertical, diagonal. And what about the queen? As you can see, the queen, the line is pretty much unoccupied. Therefore, at this moment, we capture the queen. At the same time, deliver check. But the most important at this moment is that the queen is not protected. What does it mean? It cannot be recaptured by the opponent. And now, another position. At this moment, we are having the look at the position from the black's perspective. What are the hanging pieces? The rook, the bishop, the rook, and the other bishop. Neither of them are protected by any other pieces directly. It means they are the hanging pieces. And now, how can we capture any of these? Take notice, the queen can capture the rook, the bishop cannot be captured by any other piece, the dark square bishop cannot be captured, and the rook in the corner cannot be captured as well. Therefore, the only way to capture the piece, not the pawn, is to capture the rook in the corner. At this moment, we are winning the rook and throwing the check, but it's something like the second wave. Another one. At this moment, there are no hanging pieces. The rook cannot be captured, the bishop cannot be captured, and the other rook cannot be captured. And in such cases, if you just can scan the position pretty quickly, then we can get into the position to see the same, but from the standpoint of the points. For example, which pawns can be captured in one move, no matter by the piece or the pawn, and they cannot be recaptured. The only solution is the pawn on b5. It can be captured by our pawn, and now we're winning the pawn. Another one, LPDO, hanging pieces from black's perspective. The rook in the corner, the knight on the f6 square, all of the pieces that are hanging. And now at this moment, we can capture the knight with the queen, because we have the space in between that is not occupied, and this way we are grabbing the knight, winning the material. Another one. What are the pieces that are not protected from the black's camp? In the black's camp, only the rook. All of the other pieces are protected by any other pieces or pawns, and therefore only one solution. At this case, queen captures the rook. The fact that it delivers the check will be discussed in the next episodes. Now it's not necessary. At this moment, what are the hanging pieces? The rook is protected by the bishop, and the bishop is protected by the rook, the other bishop. And of course, the bishop on f6 is protected by the pawn. Therefore, this moment, no pieces that can be captured in one move without recaptures, therefore no hanging pieces. What about the pawns? The knight can attack the pawn, the bishop can attack the pawn, the knight can attack the pawn, the rook can attack the pawn, and the rook can attack the pawn, all of the pawns that are potential targets. If we capture h5 pawn, bishop will be recapturing our bishop. If we capture the pawn g7, we lose the knight. If we capture the pawn d6, we will lose the knight due to the recapture. And finally, if we capture the pawn on a4, we lose the rook due to the light square bishop. The only safe capture, the LPDO of the pawns, not the pieces, therefore it's not like a second wave, second level, is to capture the pawn on c7. Take notice, the black pawns cannot capture backwards, the rook cannot capture diagonally, therefore we just grabbed the pawn that was hanging. And now another position, LPDOs from the black's perspective. What are the pieces that are not protected by any other pieces? These are the knight on c5. The knight on c5 is not protected by anything, and all of the other pieces are protected. The queen is protected by the knight, the bishop by the pawn, the other bishop by the king, the rook in the corner by the bishop, and the knight on c6 by the pawn. Therefore, only hanging piece is the knight. And now we can grab the knight by capturing it with the queen, and we are winning the material. Take notice, the queen cannot be recaptured. Otherwise, we'll be talking about the traits, not the LPDO. And now one more position. At this moment, take notice. What are the hanging pieces? The bishop is protected by the king, the rook is not protected. At the same time, pretty unique example, if not the bishop on f6, white king will be checkmated. Therefore, at this moment, a very funny situation that you must capture the LPDO, because otherwise you will be checkmated. Therefore, the only legal move, the only capture and disposition, at the same time LPDO, capturing the rook. Okay guys, and these were the positions and the short summary about the LPDO aka hanging piece. And now it is the micro skill, so to speak. It is one of the skills that you need to have fluency at this one in order to be able to recognize the other ideas and connect them into the bigger structures. Therefore, if you would like to be better player, you must immediately and efficiently recognize the pieces that are hanging, the LPDO or hanging pieces, as they are the backbone of the tactics. If you cannot do it, if you are unable to do it pretty efficiently, you will be having a lot of trouble when the opponent will be gifting you the pieces that you can capture for free. Take notice, I'm especially talking about efficiency, because if you'll be in a time trouble and if you're having the problem because of the other problems on the board thrown by your opponent, then you can miss the hanging pieces pretty often, especially in a deep time trouble. Therefore, you must practice these micro skills to recognize the hanging pieces and try to figure out and spot them immediately. It would be excellent if you could spot all of the hanging pieces in a middle game in less than 5 seconds. Of course, it requires practice, and as you know, practice makes perfect. Okay guys, thank you very much for watching this video, and see you next one.